So by now, you've probably heard the news that Canadians will be waiting for the vaccine a little bit longer because of the fact that the Prime Minister has announced that we're not able to manufacture them ourselves. So while the government has ordered millions of doses, we are going to be getting them after countries like the US, Britain, and Germany. How did this news make you feel?
Well, I was surprised. Didn't you guys just assume that we had the facilities to mass produce vaccines? And then I was reading everything I could read about it this morning. And apparently, if you read the fine print, there are two places, one outside of Montreal and one in Toronto, that do have the capability of mass producing, but they're not set up to produce the current leading candidates for the COVID-19 vaccine. And apparently, a facility was supposed to be ready by now, but it isn't. But maybe that's why the federal government said back in August that we would be able to produce 250,000 vaccines of our own. I don't know, and that's certainly not a lot, but it would be enough at least to protect some vulnerable populations and some healthcare workers. It just feels like the ball has been dropped so many times, and Trudeau said as much. He said, Canada is to blame. We dropped the ball. And it kind of makes me wonder if this is the most important ball. Sorry to be talking about balls, but is this the most important ball that is dropped, or is it the fact that we had the time to avoid a second wave and we didn't?
Hmm. Yeah.
Well, I will say that, you know what it is it comes down to hindsight is 50-50. I'm not going to let the current government off the hook. I think there's certainly things that we could have done, but then there's the bigger picture. And I think that there's a lot that we couldn't have done. There was a task force that was put together by the federal government when the pandemic started in the spring, and they discovered back then we do not have the facilities that are capable to mass produce any of the vaccines that was potentially going to happen. But if we all go back to then, we didn't know and weren't even talking about vaccines back then in a very real way at all. There was a very good chance that we would have no vaccines to this. Back then, it was like, what is this thing? Never mind, how are we going to get out of this thing? I don't think we even knew what the heck we were dealing with back in the spring. And we never had the capabilities back then. And the task force discovered, even if we start to invest right now, we still won't have them up and running in time. And by the way, to your point, Jess, we wouldn't have known what kind of facility to build, even if you did have the capability to start putting shovels in the ground in March, because we had no idea what a vaccine was going to look like. And every vaccine has to have a different kind of manufacturing plant. So we are talking like hindsight's 50-50, and we just can't play that game. And then it comes down to just plain politics. Every government who's in power has to prioritize their spending. And so for 25 years, government after government after government has not prioritized the production of biopharmaceuticals. They just haven't, because no one predicted a pandemic quite like this.
Apparently,
so I'm not going to fault anybody for that.
Apparently,
but
they
I'm
did after
looking
SARS.
ahead.
Apparently, they did after SARS, and they invested millions in trying to find the best microbiologists and bring them to Ontario specifically. And they were leading science, but all of that got cut in budgets.
Right.
Well,
Yeah,
this is
it's
the
hard
problem.
not.
We can have an asteroid defense system because we should be ready for an asteroid, but what government is going to get ready just in case? The same can be applied to a pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to assume that some of this is based in red tape and mismanagement of leadership. I mean, if Trudeau is wearing the blame of this, the truth is that the dismantling of our vaccine production capabilities, it actually happened decades ago, and many will point to conservative governments who dismantled them. But even still, even if previous governments hadn't done that, it's possible that our vaccine making capability wouldn't have even worked out now, because according to the head of Biotech Canada, the vaccines that Canada is looking at, that the world is looking at, quite frankly, it's like very high tech. It's basically the illusion was given. It's like saying to Ford's motor plant, "Why don't you make Apple iPhones?" Right? Like there's a newness to all of this. What I think is interesting is that this feels like a very Canadian story. Like I think back to like traveling through Europe, and a lot of times we did a bus tour, and it was like the Canadians were sort of standing in the back, and then the Americans were often like shoving their way forward, and I feel like a similar vibe right now to that. But the possible, here's the thing. It's extra good news that Joe Biden is the new leader, because I tell you, we know for a fact that Donald Trump had his issues with Canada. And so I feel like that vaccine would have been even further delayed. I feel like Joe Biden has good sentiments. But the bigger thing that Canada is going to have to deal with is getting people, once we even have the vaccine, on board with getting the vaccine. Yeah. That's going to be a bigger issue.
But I feel like
I'm
we've
glad you
always
mentioned
kind of
leadership,
been behind.
Cynthia. Go ahead, Kate.
Go ahead, Lainey. I just feel like we've always been behind the ball. Wasn't it us at the start of this begging for PPE? Wasn't it us begging for masks because we just were not producing it? We've always been behind the ball when it comes to production. And, you look into the places and where you're manufacturing, a lot of people are saying, well, there are spots. Like Cynthia said, that's going to take years in order to get it to a point where it does create this vaccine. And we haven't even touched or talked about the education that needs to go into that. Those that have to survey for how much the vaccine's going to cost. Like, there are years and years of it. So, I mean, I don't even think that back then, if Trudeau was thinking of these things, it would be ready in time. It would take at least 4 years. I think the issue here is this was not a part of the conversation period from Jump Street. And I think it kind of showed maybe a hole in that we need to be better when it comes to creating plans for the what ifs, the what happens. But hey, guys.
Who's going to pay?
Exactly. Who is going to pay? One, who's going to think about these things? I could sit here and tell you, I'm sure Justin Trudeau wasn't thinking back in the day, oh, wow, a pandemic's coming. Nobody could have prepared for this. But now we know, so now we do better moving forward.
Nobody could have prepared for this. I think we've established that the infrastructure problems that exist for us not to be able to produce vaccines existed before the pandemic, right? They weren't caused over the last 9 months. So fine. So now I'm talking just about leadership and the way that you communicate to your citizens what your capabilities are. Why is it that we're only just finding out now? I mean, that is what the issue is that a lot of people are upset about. Why is it that the Trudeau government seemed to lead Canadians to believe that as soon as a vaccine was available, we'd be on it, Canadians would get it, Canadians would be safe? I think that is, for me, the leadership issue. I'm not going to blame him for the lack of infrastructure in our country. There are a lot of reasons why. I don't want to go there. What I do want to say is, I'm wondering why it took you this long when everybody else in the world is getting ready to get vaccines. You're like, we dropped the ball. I don't think that's very smart, but I do have some speculative reasons. And I wonder, listen, prior to about a month ago, all of us were wondering about the vaccine. And we've had a lot of discussions on this show with many people saying it's going to be years. I feel like that has come out of every one of the hosts on this show's mouth at one point. Okay, I'm looking online right now. National Geographic is saying it's going to be 2023. The BBC saying don't expect it before 2022. So a lot of people didn't expect a vaccine to be ready in 2020, except it has been. So my question is, was Justin Trudeau banking on the fact that the vaccine wouldn't be ready until 2021 or 2022, and he could put the infrastructure in place, and he wouldn't have to admit that the country wasn't ready, and that has backfired? And if that's the case, does the Canadian government have bad intel? And to your point, Cynthia, about being at the back of the bus and not like being on the forefront of anything, that's embarrassing to me. But if our government has such bad intel that they weren't able to get their lies in place.
But
I don't know.
Speaking of embarrassing,
hold on. Guys, we are looking at this like it's like we had the information 9 months ago that we have today. We didn't have the information that we had to have today 9 months ago. So you can't judge 9 months ago with today's perspective. And back then, we were still trying to figure out, should we be even wearing masks or not? If you remember the early conversations, it was the mask, don't mask. Are you supposed to social? We were just trying to get a handle on a brand. This virus is not even a year old. We can't walk around pretending like we have all the answers today. We just don't. And we always have known that even if a vaccine was possible or not, it was never going to be the silver bullet. You can't take people people's eyes off the prize. We still have to be masking. We still have to be social distancing. Even when Canada gets our vaccine, whenever that is, we still have to be mindful that for the vast majority of us, the life that we're living today is going to be around for us still a long while ahead, even while people are slowly starting to get the vaccine.
If that's the case,
what we do
it's about education. Like,
no,
would
but what
be
we do
having
know
a
is
spike?
we're not going to have it. We're not going to have it. So what I find is foolish is playing us for a fool and telling us first quarter of the year, we're not that foolish. Like, come on now. We're going to be sitting here and watching other countries' vaccine do what they need to do, obviously, because they have first dibs to it. So I think with the information that we do know, a clearer timeline needs to be provided.
Yeah, I was just trying to Google how many countries there are because I can't remember. Is it 159 or 185? Anyway, my point is that other countries are going to be watching us get the vaccine before they do. And I wonder if it will sting as much for them as it will sting for us when we see the UK, the US, Germany, India, Australia get it before we do.